Welcome to day 2 from Green Auto Summit, where we are speaking to experts within e-mobility industry and getting a lot of insights on what is happening at the moment and how is the future going to pan out. Today, my first guest is Matt Tymowski from Charge Europa. Welcome to the podcast, Matt.
Thank you for having me.
Matt, why don't you start us off with a quick introduction about yourself and about the company as well?
Sure thing. Hi, everyone. My name is Matt Tymowski, and I represent a company called Charge Europa. We're a CPO based in Poland, focusing specifically on the Central Eastern European market. I would say we're kind of a DC destination charging player. So we focus on deploying AC as well as DC assets, but sort of, focusing on that 60 to 90 kilowatt space. We're not going too much in the high power. We're super excited to be here and honored to get a chance to share with you some of the experiences we've had so far.
Amazing. First question that I've been asking, Matt, everyone has different perspectives on EV slowdown. We have seen in 2024 so far, Germany, definitely there's a reported slowdown. Other countries, not so much. How do you see this and where do we see ourselves going from this point onwards?
It's a burning question. Yeah, everyone, I really don't think that there's a really conflicting or controversial opinion on this. I think everyone seems to be pretty much aligned. So if you look at the EV slowdown, it's not necessarily just the EV slowdown in Germany, right? You have basically an economy that's constricting second year in a row. And that's associated with a number of factors. I would say one of them is the fact that essentially you have the rising cost of living. So, if your food costs more and your daily life is more expensive, you're going to be thinking twice about an expensive purchase. Secondly, of course, you have the rising cost of debt. So, it's going to be more and more difficult to find, let's say, a justifiable financing for an electric vehicle, which is still considered a bit of a premium product. And then, of course, you have to factor in a fairly unstable economy. Without getting too political here, I think it's safe to say that the energy mix is a fact that a lot of people are considering when looking at an electric vehicle. So I would say basically you're looking at not just sort of a focus problem on electric vehicles. It's more of like a larger macroeconomic and potentially a social political issue.
Mm-hmm.
But then you have the traditional one that everyone agrees on, which is the lack of charging infrastructure, supply chain issues, although it's becoming less and less of an issue now. So let's just say it's a compound mix of different things. But also one final thing is there is a slowdown, but look at the sales. It's like a hockey stick curve, right? So you've gone from a very, very sharp growth to a slightly less sharp growth. So yeah.
As a CPO, Matt, we look at utilization rates. What do you think? What's the ideal situation for a CPO? Because when I see a business case, the utilization rate is always discussed as one of the most important things. How do you see this? And where do we want to be with the utilization rates where it becomes a very viable business case for everyone?
It's a really good question. I think that every pure play EV charging company is going to base their revenue on utilization rates, right? If you're growing your business and you're raising capital, every institutional or debt provider is going to look at your utilization rate. Every player wants to have that magical, 15, 20. Yeah, it's definitely a factor that's challenging for companies that are looking to grow. And I would say that for us, we're definitely looking to, without putting a specific number on it, definitely get as close to that 10% that a lot of players would like to be. But we're aware of the fact that we're operating in a market where the EV adoption rate is comparatively smaller than that of Germany's. So we're talking, Poland, Croatia, Romania, Czech Republic, Slovakia. All these places have an EV adoption rate that is sub 2%. Germany's over 5% now. So you're going to have to find ways to mitigate that risk by finding alternative revenue streams. However, to answer your question, I would say everyone would like to have at least over 10%. They'll be happy and they'll sleep well at night.
And how do you see AC and DC charging infrastructure? What kind of difference do we see now? And what kind of mix do we expect in the future?
There's a bit of a growing hype for destination DC charging now. I think it's because car batteries are getting bigger. So you're going to treat, let's say, 50 or 60 kilowatt DC charger the same way that an AC 22 kilowatt charger was treated 5 years ago. So the trend is higher speeds for destination charging. However, we still see a lot of justification for the 22 kilowatts. That being said, I think we're just listening to ChargeUp over there, who are basically, the lobbyists for EV charging here in Europe, whose name is coincidentally similar to ours. And what they and what other, I think, lobbyists should be doing is educating maybe a little bit the consumers or even the property owners that most of the CPOs work with, that it's okay to have 22 AC. Every car can charge, even plug-in hybrids can charge. And if you have enough of those, you're able to provide the supply for the demand that exists. So to summarize, I would say AC is always going to be a baseline thing, but definitely DC is making a name for itself in the urban destination EV charging space.
And what's the trend that you see right now in Poland? Is it the same, that the baseline is AC and then slowly you see DC penetrating in the market?
Yeah, look, if you look at the Polish and Eastern European market, we're there with our bows and arrows. We're looking over here in Germany with, people firing rockets into space. So I would say that we're looking over to the West and figuring out what you guys are doing, trying to see some of the mistakes that are maybe made and how we can mitigate that for ourselves. You have a lot of big players that are starting to move in, the BPs, the Ionities. I've even heard rumors that a few guys over here that are pretty big names and their logos are here present. I won't point fingers, but they're eyeing essentially Eastern Europe because it's a growth market, right? A lot of the chips have fallen in the West and now they're sort of eyeing where else they could be going. And I think that's the natural next step. So you're seeing a lot of intercity EV charging now being developed along with hubs. If you look outside right now, there's a supercharger station with 20 bays. We're not seeing 20, we're seeing something like 10, which is already a big deal. And it's always in the middle of major cities. So, battery range anxiety is really being reduced. There's a huge deficit of urban charging. So cities, municipalities haven't really figured out how to structure tenders yet to provide the space for the private sector to move in. But, that's our job as well, right? We're the lobbyists. We're working with governments in those markets and helping them find smarter ways to electrify city centers, right? So I would say intercity EV charging, high power charging hubs are becoming more and more popular with the big players moving in because that's huge CapEx. But the local players are really starting to focus on developing those urban spaces that are much needed.
With high power charging, man, there's always a discussion of having enough grid capacity, for example. How do you see this as a CPO? Do you see power grid as a bottleneck right now? Or do you see, this as an enabler of e-mobility?
Of course, it's an enabler because electricity is ubiquitous. So the issue is that there's not enough of it, right? So every CPO is going to tell you, the bottlenecks are always going to be the substation capacity. But that's why batteries are becoming a popular thing. Yesterday we had Dennis from ADS Tech, super smart guy, background from Porsche. They figured out that in order to really make faster charging mainstream, you're going to have a battery buffered solution. I think 3 minutes further down this road, you'll come across the Porsche Center where they've got a big battery, and it makes sense. And you've had a few players try and do that. I think the biggest one in Germany was called Numbat. You've probably heard of them. But I think Germany's grid is a little bit too good for batteries. And I would even go as far as saying the main selling point for a battery buffered supplier is demand charges. And we'll reduce your demand charges. If you go to Romania, they have no power. They'll tell you, we have 10 kilowatts available at this site, and if you can fix it, fine. So the more emerging the market, the more justifiable battery solution becomes. Exactly. So this is definitely going to play a key role, and it's going to be an enabler, not necessarily for unit economics in Germany, but it's definitely going to be an enabler for emerging markets. That would be the key thing for access to sufficient power for your charging stations.
I once spoke with the CPO here in Germany, and they said it's a headache for them to be able to work with more than 800 DSOs. There's more than 800 DSOs in Germany. And for them to know the grid requirements of every single DSO, and they're different for many of them. getting the transformer, getting the connection, it's a big headache for them. It takes a lot of time. Is it the same for you as well?
Well, that's our job, right? That's the value added. So yes, it's a headache, but I mean, you better love talking to DSOs because as a CPO, that's basically what you're doing, right? Yes, there's a fairly saturated and fragmented market in Germany. I think it's going to be a matter of time before they find some way to standardize and make it easier and mainstream the process of connecting to the grid. This is maybe not as complex as it is in, slightly early stage market. We've got 4 or 5 DSOs to deal with, and that's enough for us already. So yeah, I would say, look, bite the bullet, accept the fact. It's part of your job. That's why you make your money. And by the way, mega big market here. So it's definitely going to be a little more challenging.
Mm-hmm.
But for us, particular in Central Eastern Europe, it's a little bit less of a headache because of the lower level of DSOs.
Okay. And from a regulatory standpoint, you think the regulations right now are fine? You just have to implement.
That's a high. Or can it? So look, I would say the following. I would say there are definitely incentives, and there is a framework that incentivizes us to connect to the grid, to even, I would say, purchase clean energy. Is it enough? Probably not, but that's also due to the fact that you constantly have an increasing range of technologies that you're connecting to the grid. Look at the people here talking about V2G. Batteries are still not really treated as batteries, at least in our part of the world. If you charge and discharge, you're actually taxed twice on this process. So, it's kind of unfair, but it's a matter of time. So I would say there's a good starting point. There's definitely room for improvement.
You mentioned V2G. Where do we see V2G moving? Because this is something that has stayed in the discussions for a long while. It's something which it's supposed to be win-win for everyone. How do you see this? Do you see this happening in the next few years, or do you think that we need to solve other problems before we get to using EVs to sort of support the power grid infrastructure?
I think V2G has gotten a lot of hype for good reason. And I think it's definitely something that will be here to stay. I think people just and consumers have maybe a bit of a difficulty in accepting the fact that, someone else is maybe using your car for a different reason, right? I think even Amazon Web Services had an issue with that sometimes, or different companies that were leveraging their end users' capacity for memory, storage, processing power, will have an issue with their own assets being used for another company's benefit. That being said, I think once again, you're going to need the lobbyists, the Charge Up Europe guys here to basically spread the good word and let consumers know that this is a good thing, that it's an enabler, and that it might be even an additional revenue source for certain people. So I would say it's here to stay, but it's going to have a rocky start. I think every other person that you'll interview with will share the same quote by an end user, and that's, why should I discharge my car when I want to charge my car? But I think if you show them the big picture, they'll start to understand that
it's more about education.
I would say it's a little more education. Everyone's an expert in V2G until you actually get down into the core exactly specifics of how it works. So yeah, I would say education is the primary thing. And that's difficult with a consumer and a population that thinks that they're experts on it, right?
Mm-hmm. But if you have to pick 3 trends that will shape our industry in the next 5 to 10 years, what would those be? What would be your top picks?
Definitely battery buffer DC charging. ADS-TEC they're one of the winners right now when it comes to hardware supply. They haven't been on the news as some of the other hardware supply for bad reasons. So I think that's a really interesting trend. I think it's here to stay.
Okay.
And I think that given the right market conditions, like we spoke about before, right? More emerging markets, they're going to have a very winning case. The trick will be to get the price per kilowatt hour at a level that would be economically justifiable. But I think that's just a matter of time. There's quite a bit of hype right now after the Robotaxi event about wireless charging. And I think that's definitely something that everyone's asking about now. And they're talking to CPOs saying, hey guys, how are you going to deal with this wireless charging? Really,
people are coming to you to the CPOs.
Oh yeah, of course. Those are assets that we're investing in, right? We're taking investors' money and deploying it in energy assets, right? And we're here plugging in cars, and they're saying, "Well, wait a second. Soon it's going to be, no interaction between the drivers. So, how do you deal with that?" And basically, I think the answer that most CPOs will give you is that they're technology agnostic. That's the hashtag that I think a lot of them like to say. So they'll say, well, look, if we're going to have to plug in or if we're going to use wireless, it's our lease, it's our land that we're renting from the commercial property. So I wouldn't say it's more of a threat. I'd say it's more of an opportunity. It's just make the charging experience more seamless. So those are two techniques. You had three, right? You asked for three technologies. What would be the third one? Look, I wouldn't say this is a new topic. I would just say that this is something that's becoming more and more popular, and that's the fact that you have very high power charging.
High power charging.
Exactly, high power charging. Once again, there's a lot of batteries involved in that on the meter side. So I'd say it's closing to the first point, but definitely you're going to see higher power charging speeds, improved cooling. One issue that I really would like to see, though, is the footprint being fixed. So basically, everyone's coming to you saying, oh, these massively high-powered chargers. But you'd be surprised how sensitive commercial properties are to the footprint that you have on their properties. So if you have a power station and a few satellites, cool. But they're still going to look at that power station and say, that could be a problem. That could be an issue for us, where every meter for a parking lot counts. And that's maybe okay if you have 1,000 parking places. But when you start going to these smaller grocery stores where they have 20, and each parking place represents a significant return for them, you're going to have some issues. So size, but like with laptops and phones, it's possible. It's just a matter of time.
And for ultra high power charging, megawatt charging, do you expect there will be pure play CPUs specifically focusing on heavy duty vehicles, or do you think that it would be a mix? CPUs would be deploying both light duty vehicle infrastructure as well as heavy duty?
For some reason now, it appears to be the latter. So you have separate players doing. I mean, look, if you look at the UK, pretty advanced market, you have those Infinium guys. They seem to be doing a very good job of building these massive hubs for the heavy duty vehicles. And when speaking to them about, drivers and, regular customers, they said, well, no, that's not our target. So basically the way they described it, and that was interesting for me, is that they're actually hiring, there's Terawatt in the US, right? What they're doing is that they're hiring people who basically build data centers.
Interesting.
Yeah. And they're basically leveraging all that know-how for developing these massive industrial scale, heavy duty vehicle charging hubs. Because basically the power need is, factor of 10 more, than a typical, even something like this that you would see, right? So I would say that for some, reason, most likely because of the energy needs, it still seems to be fragmented. There's a different expectation from the institutional investors for a heavy duty vehicle charging supplier versus a typical consumer CPO. So probably those skill sets are slightly different. And you'll see the high power, the heavy duty vehicle developers looking at slightly different properties as well. They tend to do it in those industrial parks, warehousing areas. So this is also a bit of a different real estate play, and which is why you have it fragmented. I would say that most likely we'll see the latter, with probably consolidation happening at some point where some big oil giant comes and just gobbles everyone up.
Got it. And what are the challenges specifically that you as a CPO have faced, and walk us through some of those challenges, and then, how did you overcome those challenges?
Besides the last 2 years? Yeah, I think the biggest challenge for us as a CPO in the markets that we're operating in is basically this map that every institutional investor will present you with. And that's the EV adoption rate of Germany versus Poland, for example. And you'll see that Germany's 5%, Poland's less than 0.5%. So I would say the biggest challenge for us is that if we were a pure play, we would probably not be here today. I wouldn't be here talking to you, which is why we had to basically diversify our revenue streams and leverage markets, a specific market actually, that is just 10, 20 times larger, which is digital out-of-home market. And that kind of enabled us to continue growing. So that was a big challenge. Without out-of-home advertising, we'd be a dead fish in the water today.
Right. I'm going to summarize the three trends that you mentioned. So The last thing was high power charging. The second thing was wireless charging. I'm surprised that you're saying that this is a trend we're going to see in the next few years already, and battery buffered charging. These are the three trends that you've highlighted. Thank you so much, Matt, for your time. I hope that all our listeners and viewers got a lot of insights from this discussion, and I will catch you in the next discussion. Thank you.